The lights in the CNN studio flared to life. Cameras panned slowly across the glossy stage floor, catching glimpses of the audience seated in silent anticipation. On the set of CNN Tonight, the stakes were unmistakably high. The host, Don Lemon, leaned forward at his desk, expression unreadable, fingers laced together. Across from him sat Karoline Leavitt, poised, composed, and calm in a deep navy blazer. A small gold cross necklace rested just above her collarbone, catching the light every time she shifted in her chair. The tension had been simmering for days. Promos had teased the interview as unfiltered, live, and high stakes. Headlines already circled social media like vultures. Conservative firebrand faces CNN's sharpest blade. Both sides had their claws out. Don's first words came without a smile. "Karoline, welcome. You've been making headlines again." Karoline gave a small nod, voice even. "Good to be here, Don. I'm used to the headlines." "You've claimed on multiple occasions," Don continued, sliding a folder forward on his desk, "that the administration has systematically violated Americans' constitutional rights through immigration overreach. That's a serious allegation. Do you have any actual evidence, or is this just more campaign theater?" The tone landed hard. The audience tensed, the silence buzzing. Karoline didn't flinch. "I didn't come here to perform," she said. "I came here to show America what's really happening." Her hand reached into the satchel beside her chair. As Don leaned back skeptically, she pulled out a bound stack of documents, highlighted, tabbed, and clearly prepared. The room stirred. "You're lying to America," Don said sharply. "You and your movement are spreading dangerous misinformation." Karoline's eyes locked on his. "Then you won't mind if I show you the truth." She laid the documents on the table. Real reports, leaked memos, signed orders. The camera zoomed in. The studio was no longer calm. The document sat center stage like live ammunition. Don Lemon blinked, momentarily thrown off by Karoline Leavitt's unshaking confidence. The studio lights caught the glint of the official seals on the front page. A hum ran through the room, audience members leaning forward, producers whispering frantically through headsets behind the cameras. "Let's be clear," Don said, trying to regain ground. "Anyone can bring papers. Doesn't mean what's on them is true. Where did these come from?" Karoline didn't flinch. "Directly from a DHS whistleblower. These are internal communications from the last 8 months, outlining illegal detainment procedures, unconstitutional search protocols, and data sharing with third-party contractors in direct violation of federal privacy laws." She tapped the first document. "Here's a memo dated March 14th. ICE was ordered to detain migrant families without judicial oversight. And here," she pointed to another, "this outlines facial recognition surveillance being run through third-party software with no citizen consent." Don exhaled sharply. "That's a big accusation." "It's not an accusation," Karoline replied, voice hardening. "It's evidence." The studio monitors displayed scanned pages. Viewers at home saw the words, "Classified, DHS internal use only." The camera caught Don's fingers subtly tightening on the desk. "You're telling me," he said, "that this proves the Biden administration is actively violating the Constitution?" Karoline leaned in. "I'm not telling you. The documents are." Her voice didn't raise, but the words hit like gunfire. The audience murmured, some audibly reacting. Twitter, already lit up since the first segment, exploded. There's Karoline vs. Don started trending. "I'm not here to sell a headline," she said. "I'm here to expose the truth your network refuses to cover." The words hung like fog. Don glanced at the papers, his confidence slipping just slightly. The segment producer waved from offstage, signaling to cut to commercial. But Don didn't flinch. "Stay with us," he said to the camera, his voice tense. "This just got interesting." As the lights dimmed, Karoline sat back, unmoved, arms crossed, expression cold. She had brought the storm to Don Lemon's desk. Back from commercial, the atmosphere had shifted. The CNN studio no longer felt like a neutral set. It was a battleground. Don Lemon looked directly into the camera as the segment resumed. We're back with Karoline Leavitt, and she's brought what she claims are classified DHS documents. Now, before we continue, CNN has not independently verified any of the material she's provided. Karoline didn't even glance at the camera. Her attention was still locked on Don. That's convenient, she said, but you've run entire segments based on anonymous sources and unnamed officials. Suddenly, verification matters? Don pressed his lips together for a beat. Let's talk about the context, he said. Even if some of these documents are authentic, internal memos don't always reflect enacted policy. You know that. You're presenting shadows as monsters. Karoline leaned forward. Shadows don't detain mothers in front of their kids. Monsters do. There it was again. That sharp, unflinching tone, no flourish, no theatrics, just steel. Let's say your documents are real, Don pushed. What do you expect the administration to do? Halt all enforcement? Open borders? No, Karoline replied coolly. I expect them to enforce the law without violating the Constitution, to prioritize American sovereignty without turning us into a surveillance state. There's a line between security and tyranny, and they crossed it. The words hit hard. Don looked down at the stack, clearly reassessing. But he wasn't done. Karoline, what you're doing is dangerous. You're feeding a narrative that law enforcement is the enemy. Karoline's reply was instant. No, Don, I'm calling out leadership that uses law enforcement as a shield for abuse. There's a difference. Real patriots don't turn a blind eye when power goes unchecked. A murmur rippled through the studio audience. Some clapped, others exchanged glances. Don tried one more swing. You call yourself a patriot, but many would say what you're doing is destabilizing, eroding trust in institutions. Karoline's voice dropped lower, quieter but more powerful. Blind trust in broken institutions is how democracies die. Silence. Even Don didn't speak for a moment. The screen behind them displayed the words, Breaking, Karoline Leavitt unveils DHS documents on CNN. America was watching. And this wasn't the story Don Lemon had expected to tell tonight. Behind the cameras, the atmosphere turned electric. Producers were scrambling. A senior CNN exec was on the phone, pacing furiously off stage. The control room was throwing up red flags, legal review, PR prep, potential fallout. But inside the studio, Karoline Leavitt remained calm, still, focused. Don Lemon leaned back in his chair, the studio lights now casting a sharper shadow across his face. Karoline, you're not just making political waves here, you're making legal ones. Do you understand what leaking classified documents on national television means? Karoline didn't blink. I didn't leak anything. I disclosed them. Big difference. He frowned. You're splitting hairs. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice like a sniper lowers her scope. I'm showing the American people what their government's been doing behind closed doors. If that's uncomfortable for CNN, maybe ask yourself why. The words stabbed deeper than her tone implied. Don turned to the camera, but the fire in his eyes was dimming. We have protocols for a reason. Transparency doesn't justify recklessness. Karoline replied with precision. Cover-ups don't count as protocols, and the Constitution doesn't bend for public relations. Her delivery had the control of someone trained, not just in politics, but in battle. Meanwhile, online platforms surged. TikTok clips of her raising the documents were already being remixed, cut with dramatic music and overlaid captions like Truth Bomb Live and CNN Meltdown. Twitter was relentless. Even Elon Musk had reposted a clip, captioning it, "Accountability isn't extremism." Don tried again, almost pleading now. You don't care about the consequences, do you? What if this sparks panic, violence? Do you want that on your hands? Karoline narrowed her gaze. What I want is accountability. Panic happens when people realize how long they've been lied to. A long pause. The producer signaled another break, but Don ignored it. He stared across the desk, like a man who finally understood he wasn't conducting an interview anymore. He was surviving a reckoning. And Karoline Leavitt was the one holding court. The audience had stopped blinking. Some leaned forward in their seats, eyes locked on the desk. Others whispered to one another, trying to make sense of the shift they were witnessing. This wasn't the usual partisan face-off. It was something raw, different. Don Lemon took a breath, clearly rethinking his next move. Karoline, if you're so confident in your facts, why not let federal investigators handle it? Why make it a media stunt? Karoline raised a single eyebrow, her voice steady. You mean the same federal agencies that buried this? The same media platforms that called it a conspiracy until I dropped proof on your desk? A ripple of gasps echoed through the studio. She reached for a second file, thinner than the first, but marked with a red stamp. Do not distribute. Her fingers traced it like she knew exactly what it was about to do. Don shifted in his chair. Where did you get that? Karoline didn't answer. She opened it. Inside, documented communications between mid-level DHS officials discussing narrative alignment with media outlets, including one message referencing CNN directly. Don's face paled for a moment before he recovered. That's completely out of context. Carolina held it up. Is it? He didn't respond. The silence wasn't just in the studio anymore. The control room went dead quiet. The network's legal team had gone into lockdown. Executives were exchanging texts with words like crisis comms and containment. Karoline sat back, voice lower but more forceful. America isn't stupid, Don. You think if people see the truth, they'll panic. I think they'll wake up. The screen behind them switched to split screen, Karoline on one side, documents visible. Don Lemon frozen in an uncharacteristic silence. Social media was exploding. Hashtags like #Karoline drops proof, #CNN complicit, and Leave It Unleashed trended within minutes. It wasn't just a segment anymore, it was a moment, the kind that replays for weeks. And for Karoline Leavitt, it was the moment she stopped being just a voice from the right and became a storm neither side could ignore. By the time the commercial break finally hit, CNN's newsroom was in chaos. Editors whispered in corners. Senior staff huddled, debating whether to cut the segment or lean in. A producer's headset blared with directives from legal. Kill the feed if she pulls another file. Too late. The internet had already seen it. Inside the studio, the break was a formality. Cameras still rolled quietly. Mics still picked up every rustle of paper. And Karoline Leavitt? She didn't flinch. Don Lemon sipped water. His hand trembled just slightly, but enough for the audience to catch it. You know what you're doing, he finally said, breaking the quiet. You're trying to dismantle trust in our institutions. Karoline looked at him unblinking. I'm dismantling the illusion. There's a difference. Don scoffed. You're feeding division. She leaned forward. Division already exists. I'm just showing people where the cracks are. Producers gestured wildly behind the glass, signaling to Don to pivot, steer it somewhere safer, but his pride wouldn't let him. You're making yourself a symbol for the angry right, he said, a new face for outrage politics. Karoline folded her hands, calm as ever. Good. Then maybe that outrage will finally be pointed in the right direction. The line hit hard. Online, the digital wildfire only grew. Conservative influencers called it a red letter broadcast. Moderates shared the clip of Karoline calmly laying down documents with captions like, "Whatever your politics, this was unreal." Even liberal voices were reluctantly admitting, she came armed. CNN wasn't ready. Meanwhile, outside the studio in Midtown Manhattan, a crowd was forming. Some carried signs, some live-streamed, but all were tuned in, watching a young conservative woman dismantle a legacy anchor on his own stage. Inside, Don tried to regain control. The American people deserve better than theatrics. Karoline's voice cut through. Then maybe someone else should be in your seat. The camera caught Don's reaction. A flash of disbelief, then stone-faced silence. That was the moment even the producers stopped breathing. The clip of Karoline saying, "Then maybe someone else should be in your seat," had already gone viral before the segment even returned from break. People weren't just watching anymore, they were choosing sides. In Times Square, the CNN ticker ran half a second behind Twitter. Protesters and supporters gathered, shouting slogans. Some held handmade signs. "Truth greater than TV," "Karoline said it first," and "Documents don't lie." Meanwhile, in the studio, Don Lemon adjusted his tie. The control room was in full damage control mode. They wanted a pivot. They wanted resolution. But Karoline Leavitt had something else in mind. She glanced at the camera. "I didn't come here to start a fight. I came here because Americans are sick of being lied to. By government and by media," Don cut in. "No one lied to them, Karoline. You're weaponizing distrust." She smiled coldly. I'm responding to it." He tried again. "You think undermining public faith helps anyone? I think blind trust got us here." Silence. Then a thunderous response. Not from the studio, but from online. Reddit threads exploded with frame-by-frame breakdowns. Telegram groups called her the new voice of rebellion. Even skeptical centrists began asking, "What else is being hidden?" Don raised a hand, almost pleading. "You came on this show, dropped documents, accused federal agencies, and now you're asking us to what? Trust you?" Karoline didn't miss a beat. "No, Don, I'm asking Americans to trust themselves, to read, to question, and to remember that truth doesn't need permission to exist." The crowd outside CNN HQ now numbered in the hundreds. Some cheered her name, others chanted against her. But the message was clear. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a rupture. And Karoline Leavitt stood in the middle of it, uncowed, unchanged, and unshaken, holding nothing but a handful of documents and the weight of millions who had finally seen something they couldn't unsee. The cameras cut back in from commercial, but this time the audience wasn't just watching, they were leaning in. Something had shifted. Don Lemon adjusted his blazer with a faint smirk, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Karoline," he began, voice dipped in smooth condescension, "you can't just throw out claims and expect people to take your word for it. This isn't a campaign stop. This is CNN." Karoline Leavitt didn't blink. She calmly reached down, her hand steady as stone, and placed a thick folder on the table. Not flashy, not theatrical. It wasn't for show. It was weight, literal and symbolic. The sound it made when it hit the glass desk was crisp, final. "You want receipts, Don?" she said, voice level, tone lethal. "Here they are." The audience behind the glass went still. For a brief second, even Don Lemon seemed unsure whether to interrupt her or brace for impact. He chose the latter. Karoline opened the folder with precision. Inside, government memos, email screenshots, redacted reports, dated policy statements, and, most damning of all, a signed directive from a top-level official contradicting the exact claim Don had just made live. "This," she said, holding up a page toward the camera, "is from the Department of Homeland Security. It confirms what I stated just minutes ago, that the agency was advised to suppress internal crime tracking data tied to undocumented migrants in election year reports. You called me a liar. America deserves to know who's lying." Don tried to cut in. "That's an out of context." But Karoline didn't yield. "Context?" she snapped. "The context is transparency. The context is the public being told that everything's fine while your network runs damage control instead of investigative journalism." The control room was silent. The producers stopped giving direction through Don's earpiece. Even the prompter slowed down. She slid 2 more documents across the desk. "Fact-check these. I dare you. Because if CNN still employs anyone who remembers how to verify a source, they'll realize what I just handed you isn't opinion. It's policy. Signed, dated, and deliberately buried." Don leaned back slightly, visibly rattled. This wasn't the punch-and-play confrontation he'd expected. It wasn't a viral shouting match. It was surgical, and it was working. Karoline looked into the camera again, her voice dropping low, direct to the American public. Ask yourself, why is the media so afraid of you seeing these documents? Why do they call truth dangerous? Because it threatens power. I'm not here to protect power. I'm here to dismantle the lies it hides behind. The moment froze. It was no longer a debate. It had become a reckoning. The fallout wasn't gradual. It was immediate. Within 60 seconds of Karoline Leavitt laying the documents flat for the cameras, clips began circulating online. Not from CNN's official account, but from viewers who knew they had just witnessed a political aftershock. Screen recordings, live stream rips, zoomed-in frames of the DHS letter, and timestamps of Don Lemon's silence went viral in real time. Leavitt files hit trending within 8 minutes. Then number CNN check your facts. By the 20-minute mark, a TikTok video of Karoline's takedown, overlaid with the caption, "This is how you end media gaslighting," had already surpassed 1.5 million views. In conservative circles, it was a declaration of war. On forums, Substacks, Telegram channels, and podcasts, hosts exploded with glee. She brought the proof, live, on their own set, and he had nothing. Fox News cut into its own programming to replay the moment. Dan Bongino tweeted, "Karoline didn't just win the room, she flipped the whole damn table." But what truly shook the establishment wasn't the right-wing cheer. It was the sudden, uneasy silence from liberal voices. Usually quick to discredit rising Republican figures, progressive influencers and pundits were cautious. Some tried the usual spin. This was taken out of context. That document isn't confirmed. But the receipts were now public. Independent fact-checkers began digging and, shockingly, validating parts of what Karoline claimed. That was the real crack in the wall. Even Snopes admitted, preliminary verification of the documents suggests authenticity. And that was enough. By that night, CNN's executive team was scrambling. Legal advisors requested copies of the documents aired. PR staff were locked in Zoom calls deciding whether to issue a clarification, a retraction, or, worst of all, remain silent and let the moment pass. But it wasn't passing. Karoline's team remained eerily quiet. No tweets, no press releases, no gloating. Just one post hours later. A photo of her folder on the desk, no caption. Don Lemon, meanwhile, appeared composed in the studio, but leaks from inside CNN told another story. Producers said he slammed the door of his dressing room, that he accused the control room of sabotaging him, that he demanded the network issue a formal counterstatement. It never came. Instead, the public kept watching the clip, sharing it, quoting it, and, most damningly, trusting it. Even undecided voters chimed in, "I don't like either party, but at least she showed up with something real." What Karoline had done wasn't just defend herself. She redefined the moment. It wasn't about winning a point. It was about showing Americans they weren't crazy for questioning what they'd been told. And that one folder, placed deliberately on a hostile desk, had shattered a media myth with the force of truth. The studio lights cooled, but Karoline Leavitt was still burning. Don Lemon sat frozen, his practiced composure cracking at the edges. The desk between them now felt less like a piece of furniture and more like a dividing line between establishment and disruption, between controlled narrative and raw truth. He blinked slowly, visibly recalibrating his next move, but it was already too late. Karoline leaned forward, her voice no longer sharp but resolute, the calm after a political storm. "You called me dangerous," she said, her tone low but firm. "But what's truly dangerous is a media institution that filters facts through ideology. I came here to speak directly to the American people, not for ratings, not for clout, but because they deserve to know who's shaping their reality." Don opened his mouth but closed it again. There was nothing left to say. She hadn't just out-argued him, she had out-prepared him, out-timed him. And worst of all, for a media veteran, she had read the moment better than him. Karoline rose slowly, not with triumph, but with clarity. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. The silence said it all. Even the crew, normally mechanical, so paused their motions. The tension wasn't hostile anymore. It was respect, or at least the recognition that something had shifted. Outside the studio, protesters and supporters now faced off in Times Square. Chants clashed, signs waved, and police began separating crowds. But none of that noise bled into the CNN set. In that space, Karoline stood alone, not as a press secretary, not even as a partisan, but as a symbol of what happens when preparation, conviction, and timing collide in the right moment. As she walked toward the exit, Don finally spoke, just 3 words, nearly a whisper. Was it worth it? Karoline didn't stop walking. She just turned her head slightly and replied over her shoulder, "Ask them." And with that, she was gone. Outside, the world was already reacting. Headlines broke. Karoline Leavitt shocks CNN in on-air document reveal. New York Post, media war erupts after CNN clash. Politico, Leavitt's quiet victory loud online. The Hill, Don Lemon under fire after brutal interview fallout. Variety. By dawn, conservative networks were calling it the folder herd around the nation. Twitter rebranded the clip the Leavitt moment. Reddit threads exploded with frame-by-frame analysis. Someone remixed her Ask Them line into a lo-fi beat that hit 100,000 plays on SoundCloud in hours. But Karoline stayed silent. No morning shows, no interviews, just a statement from her press team. Truth doesn't need a spin cycle. The evidence speaks for itself. And maybe that was the most disruptive thing of all. She didn't fight the media with more media. She just brought the receipts and let them smolder. Tonight wasn't about me, and it wasn't about Don Lemon. It was about something bigger, truth versus narrative. For too long, Americans have been told what to believe by people who think they're untouchable. They sit behind polished desks, surrounded by lights, scripts, and applause, but tonight, one folder of facts cut through all of that. You may not agree with me. That's your right. That's America. But if you felt a shiver down your spine when those documents hit the table, that wasn't politics, it was clarity. The Constitution doesn't belong to one party. Truth doesn't need permission to be told. And standing up, especially when you're told to sit down, isn't a stunt, it's a duty. So to every viewer out there who's tired of being told to shut up, to stand back, or to wait their turn, I see you. And I promise you this, I won't stop speaking up, not for applause, not for headlines, but because this country still matters. They tried to corner me tonight. Instead, I drew a line. Good night and stay awake, America.